I still remember the exact moment I learned my name wasn't really Jake Miller, standing in a funeral home parking lot, staring at a yellowed newspaper clipping of a smiling 3-year-old boy who looked exactly like me. The headline read, "Grayson Heir Vanishes from Florida Park." That boy was worth $93 million. That boy was me. But let me back up to the garage. For 28 years, I slept on a cot wedged between Leon's toolbox and a rusted generator that leaked oil. The house, a white 2-story with blue shutters that Todd and Stephanie called home, had 4 bedrooms. I knew because I'd cleaned every one of them since I was 7 years old. Leon Miller told me the same thing every time I asked why I couldn't sleep inside: "You're not blood, Jake. We took you in when nobody wanted you. You earn your place here by working, not whining." So I worked. I fixed tractors before school. I hauled firewood until my hands blistered. I learned to be invisible during family dinners, eating reheated scraps at the kitchen counter after everyone else had gone to watch TV. Christmas mornings were the worst. I'd wake up to the sound of wrapping paper tearing and Stephanie's squeals echoing through the walls. By the time I was allowed inside, the living room floor would be covered in ribbons and boxes, new bikes, computers, designer clothes. Karen would hand me a small gift wrapped in newspaper. Usually socks. Once, a used dictionary. "Be grateful," she'd say, her smile tight. "Some orphans get nothing." I believed her. I believed all of it, that I was damaged goods, that gratitude was the only currency I had, that sleeping in a garage was fair payment for existing. Then Leon died of a heart attack at 62, and everything I thought I knew started to crack. The day of Leon Miller's funeral felt like standing between 2 worlds that refused to see me. Everyone in town showed up in their best black suits, saying flattering things about a man who built his life on faith and hard work. I stood at the back by the exit, not with the family, just a silent worker with a name tag still pinned to my borrowed suit. Karen didn't even glance toward me. Todd and Stephanie sat in the front pew pretending to cry, though their faces didn't move much behind carefully practiced grief. I watched the casket being lowered and realized that I felt nothing, no sorrow, no anger. Just a hollow sort of stillness that comes from years of being told that feelings don't matter when you're the wrong son. When the service ended, people spilled out onto the church steps where the sunlight burned like judgment. That's when I saw him, the man in the blue suit. He wasn't part of the congregation. His shoes were too polished, his haircut too neat, his expression too direct. He walked toward me like he already knew who I was. "Jake Miller?" His voice was calm, more professional than curious. "My name's Harold Kentucky. I represent a private legal office that's been searching for you for a long time." I frowned, thinking he'd mistaken me for someone else. "You've got the wrong guy. I'm nobody worth finding." He gave a small smile, patient, not mocking, and handed me an envelope thick enough to make my palms sweat. "Open this when you're alone. It concerns your identity. And your inheritance." The word inheritance hit like a foreign sound. Me and inheritance didn't belong in the same sentence. I almost laughed, but Harold had already walked away, disappearing behind a line of parked cars before I could say anything. That night, I sat in the garage again. The generator hummed like it always had, a dull throbbing lullaby. The Miller's house glowed through the kitchen window. I could see the silhouettes of Todd and Stephanie sitting by the fire, eating something expensive even during morning week. I held the envelope under the dim light bulb, hesitating before tearing it open. Inside were documents, legal copies, birth certificates, medical forms, and a photograph. The photograph stopped my breath. It showed a small boy in red sneakers sitting on the shoulders of a smiling young couple near a yacht. The boy had my face. Same eyes, same small scar above the left eyebrow from when I'd fallen off a bike as a kid. The attached newspaper clipping filled the room with silence. "Grayson Heir vanishes from Florida Park, $2 million reward offered." The date, June 5, 1994. I turned the page and found a typed note from Harold Kent. You were born Alexander Grayson, son of Laura and Daniel Grayson, both founders of Grayson Marine Industries. You disappeared at age 3 during a family outing. Recent information suggests you were taken by individuals connected to your family's former employees. Please contact me immediately. Proof of inheritance enclosed. My hands trembled as I read the last line, estimated trust value, $93 million. I sat there staring at the number, feeling like the air had been punched out of me. $93 million. I barely made $9 an hour fixing farm equipment. The next morning, I rode the town bus to Harold's office, a brick building above the bank. He was already waiting when I arrived, everything laid out neatly on the desk, copies of my supposed birth records, hospital ID bracelets, even DNA results that matched my profile from a blood test I'd once taken for a job. The evidence is beyond question, Harold explained firmly. You are Alex Grayson. These people, he nodded toward the Miller's address on a sheet of paper, stole you. I stared at him. Leon and Karen? They said they adopted me from an orphanage in Texas. They forged those papers, Harold said quietly. Karen's brother was the sheriff in Pine Ridge County back then. He signed false documents for them after the abduction. We found his name in the old registry. You were hidden in plain sight. I sank into the chair, the world shrinking into noise. I remembered my childhood, the rules, the endless work, the way Karen always panicked around police officers, how she never let me go to school events that required birth certificates. Pieces that never fit were suddenly snapping into place, painfully, completely. So they knew all along, I said slowly. Yes. Harold's expression softened. They knew exactly who you were. Leon worked for your real parents at Grayson Marine the summer before the kidnapping. After the abduction, he quit and moved west. Your case stayed unsolved because the trail ended here. I didn't realize I was gripping the armrest until my knuckles turned white. And now what happens? The FBI will take over. But first, you need to confirm your identity with a new DNA test. Once that's done, the trust fund and the estate transfer will begin. That night, I didn't return to the garage. I booked a cheap room at the motel near the highway and locked myself inside. For the first time, I tried saying it out loud, my name is Alex Grayson. The words didn't sound real. They felt like something stolen from a stranger's dream. I thought about Karen's cold glares, Todd's mockery, Leon's sermons about hard work, all suddenly meaningless. They'd built their entire life on a lie. And I had built mine under their roof, believing I owed them gratitude for kidnapping me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching headlights pass by the road, and realized my life, the life I thought I knew, had already ended long before Leon's funeral. The DNA test felt almost anticlimactic. A cotton swab rubbed against my cheek, a silent click from the technician's camera, a few signatures. Harold said it would take a week for the results, but time in that week stretched like glue, slow, heavy, filled with ghosts. I stayed at the motel, refusing to go near the Miller house. Still, their presence clung to me like oil on skin. Every morning, I expected Karen's knock at the garage door, her voice telling me to fix the generator or scrub the porch. But all I got was quiet, the kind of quiet that reminds you how much of your life was built on someone else's rules. 3 days after the test, Harold called. The results are in, he said. His voice carried an edge, like the weight of too many truths. It's a match. 99.9%. There's no doubt. You're Alexander Grayson. I didn't respond right away. My throat closed around the words I didn't know how to say. Finally, I managed. So what happens to the Millers? The Bureau's already involved, Harold said softly. They've been reviewing your case since we filed the re-examination request. You might want to stay away from Pine Ridge for a few days. But the curiosity burned too deep. That evening, I parked across the street from the Miller property, disguising my truck behind the old oak tree. The windows were dark, except for faint movement near the kitchen. Then flashing red and blue lights filled the yard. I recognized the sound: police radios, the crunch of boots on gravel. Karen was on the porch in her robe, shouting something I couldn't hear. 2 FBI agents led her down the steps, her wrists cuffed. For a moment, she looked almost smaller, not the towering woman who'd ruled my life with guilt, but a tired figure trying to defend a collapsing story. Todd and Stephanie stood frozen in the doorway. Todd's jaw hung slack, Stephanie cried into her phone. Their world was breaking apart, and yet I felt no joy, only an odd emptiness. Like watching a storm wipe clean everything you'd grown up hating, and realizing you still have to step into the mud afterward. The agents found papers in the living room fireplace. Karen had been burning old files, exactly as Harold predicted. They pulled out charred documents, fragments of false adoption records, and a faded photo of me as a toddler at the docks. When they drove away, I sat in my truck for a long time. The porch light flickered and died. Harold called again later that night. "They've confirmed the forgery network," he said. "Karen's brother falsified every adoption record. He passed away 6 years ago, but his signature matches our evidence. You're free of them, Alex." Free. The word sounded heavy, not light. Like something that demanded rebuilding. For days later, Harold arranged for me to meet her, my real mother. The reunion was set in a private room at the hospital where she'd requested to see me. Laura Grayson. Her name had lived in headlines and corporate reports, but for me, it existed like a myth, a woman on the other side of a sealed memory. When the door opened, I froze. She looked older than the photos Harold had shown, but the same warmth lived in her eyes, clear blue, intense, waiting. She stood slowly, hands trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered my name. "Alex." The sound shattered me. No one had ever said it before, not like that, not with that certainty. She reached into her bag and pulled out something small, a pair of red sneakers, their soles cracked from age. I recognized them instantly, not from memory, but from dreams I'd had as a child, flashes of sunlight, a woman laughing, the smell of the ocean. "You wore these the day you disappeared," she said, her voice breaking. "I never threw them away. I took them gently." The leather was stiff, but the touch felt alive, like a connection stretching across decades. She stepped closer, hesitating only for a second before hugging me. I didn't know how to move, my arms hung limp at first, then finally found their place around her. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's project or property. I felt like a son. We sat together for hours, going through photographs, her telling fragments of the years in between, how the search drained everything, how the police had stopped calling, how she hired private investigators long after they told her to move on. When it got dark outside, she looked at me and said, "They can never give back what they took from you. But I can promise one thing, we'll start from now." I nodded. For once, I didn't need to fill the silence. Later, in the car back to the motel, Harold turned to me and said, "You do realize this changes everything. The company, your assets, even your legal name." I stared out the window at the city skyline. "I don't want the money," I said quietly. "I just want to stop feeling like a mistake." He gave a small nod. "You won't. Not anymore." That night, before I fell asleep, I looked at the red sneakers on the bedside table. Somehow, they were brighter than I remembered, not just because of what they were, but because of what they meant. A promise survived. A truth uncovered. I was no longer Jake Miller, the orphan boy who slept beside a generator. I was Alex Grayson, the missing son who'd finally come home. Freedom looked nothing like I imagined. For the first few weeks after Karen's arrest, I stayed with my mother in her large glass-walled house by the coast, the Grayson estate, as everyone called it. To me, it felt more like a museum filled with memories that didn't belong to me. Every painting, every family photo, every echo of laughter that lingered in the hallway reminded me of the life I'd never lived. Reporters camped outside the gates. The story of the lost Grayson heir spread faster than wildfire. My mother tried to shield me from the noise, but every news headline reminded me how unreal my situation was. They talked about money, fortune, legacy, but no one talked about the years that had vanished, the quiet suffering in that cold garage, or how it felt to realize your entire past was a lie. I spent mornings walking along the cliff behind the house, where the wind carried the smell of salt and rain. Sometimes my mother joined me, telling stories about the company, about my father, who had died years after I went missing. "He never stopped hoping you'd come back," she said once, her voice trembling. "Even when the police gave up, he printed your photo every year on your birthday." She showed me a small cedar chest in his study. Inside was a stack of birthday cards, one for every year since 1994. Some unopened, some with notes too short to read without feeling something break inside me. I sat there for an hour, reading each one, realizing for the first time that I'd been loved all along, even when I didn't know it. But love didn't erase the habits the Millers had carved into me. I still woke up early, expecting chores. I still apologized every time I took food from the fridge, or reached for something expensive. My mother noticed. She'd gently stop me, saying, "You don't owe anyone permission to exist, Alex." I wanted to believe her, but 30 years is a long time to unlearn captivity. Harold visited frequently, handling the legal aftermath. The FBI had finished the investigation, confirming everything: the forged papers, the sheriff's involvement, the trail that led straight back to Leon's dock shift in 1994. Karen would face trial for kidnapping, fraud, and obstruction. Todd and Stephanie were being questioned about what they knew. "They'll probably lose everything," Harold said as he signed another set of forms. "They already did," I replied quietly. "They just don't know it yet." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Would you want to see them? Sometimes closure requires confrontation." I didn't know. The thought of facing them made my stomach twist, but the idea of never seeing them again felt incomplete. They'd stolen my life, but they'd also been my reality. And reality leaves fingerprints that memory can't wash away. A week later, I agreed. The county jail was smaller than I remembered, a dull gray block behind iron gates. Karen sat behind the glass, wearing an orange jumpsuit that somehow looked too harsh on her pale skin. When she saw me, her expression didn't soften, it hardened, like stone trying to hold dignity. "So," she said, voice flat, "the boy from the garage turned out to be a millionaire." I said nothing at first. Just looked at her, really looked. For years, I'd feared her. Now I saw only exhaustion and bitterness, a woman undone by her own lies. "Why?" I finally asked. "Why take me?" Her lip trembled, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Leon wanted a son. We couldn't have more children. Then that boy went missing, and he said God had given us a chance. Said no one would miss what was already gone. That boy was me," I said, my voice low. My mother never stopped missing me. Something flickered in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or the last trace of denial. "We gave you a home," she murmured. "You could have ended up worse." "A garage isn't a home," I said. "Work isn't love." She turned away, staring at the concrete wall. "You'll never understand what Leon went through." Maybe not. But I understood what I went through, and that was enough. I stood up and left, her voice fading behind me, whispering things I no longer needed to hear. When I got home, I sat by the ocean again, feeling the weight in my chest shift. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible. Maybe it didn't need to be. Some wounds aren't meant to close. They're meant to remind you to never let anyone chain your worth to their mercy. That night, my mother cooked dinner, her first with me at the table. She laughed when I tried to help, saying, "Sit down, Alex. You've done enough work for one lifetime." We ate by the window, watching the tide roll in. I told her about the garage, the tools, the winters so cold I could see my breath before falling asleep. She listened without interrupting, tears sliding silently down her face. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You're home now. No one will ever make you feel small again." Her words settled inside me like something both fragile and strong. I looked out at the horizon, the sea stretching endlessly, and realized she was right. My new life wasn't about the money, or the name, or the legacy. It was about reclaiming the person they'd tried to erase. For the first time, I felt the future breathing somewhere ahead, waiting patiently, not for the boy from the garage, but for the man who finally walked away from it. The house grew quieter after the reporters left. For the first time in decades, silence didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like space, space to breathe, to think, to live without waiting for an order or a threat. I began to wake up later in the mornings, no alarm, no chores, no cold concrete floor. Just sunlight through tall curtains and the slow rhythm of waves rolling in from the cliffs. But peace came with its own kind of noise, memories that wouldn't let go. Each object I touched carried some invisible echo of the boy I used to be. A mug would remind me of the chipped metal cup from the garage, a neatly folded blanket would bring back the smell of engine oil and rust. Freedom didn't erase the scars, it simply gave them enough light to show their shape. My mother, patient as ever, suggested therapy. "You've lived under control for too long," she said one morning over tea. "You deserve to learn how to be free without feeling guilty about it." I agreed, though the thought of sitting across from a stranger and talking about my life felt awkward. The therapist, Dr. Byrne, had calm eyes and a steady voice. On the first day, I told her that I still flinched when someone raised their hand too quickly, even if it was just to wave hello. She said trauma had a way of teaching the body to live in defense mode. The goal, she explained, is not to erase what happened. It's to stop letting it dictate how you move through the world. So every week, we talked, about the Millers, about the years lost, about the guilt that never made sense but lingered anyway. Slowly, I began to notice small shifts in myself. I walked with straighter shoulders. I met people's eyes longer. And when I passed a garage or smelled gasoline, I didn't freeze anymore. Meanwhile, Harold kept bringing updates from the legal side. "Karen pled guilty to the kidnapping," he said one afternoon during a visit. "The sentence will likely be 25 years. I didn't ask for details. I just nodded. "And Todd and Stephanie? They're struggling," he admitted. "Most of their assets came from Leon's fraud. They're facing bankruptcy." The news didn't bring satisfaction, only an odd sense of balance. Justice, maybe. A slow correction of the universe. But revenge wasn't what I wanted anymore. I'd already lost too many years to bitterness. Instead, I started thinking about how to use what I had, not just the money, but the voice I finally owned. I asked Harold how much of the inheritance could be used to start something meaningful, something for kids like me. He smiled for the first time that day. "Anything, if you're ready to begin." And so the Grayson Foundation was born, an organization to help children from abusive or neglectful homes find education, housing, and counseling. My mother offered part of the estate, Harold handled the paperwork. Within months, plans turned into buildings, and buildings into safe spaces. I started visiting foster homes. Speaking with kids who reminded me of myself, quiet, bruised by silence, afraid of kindness. The first time I told my story publicly, my hands shook. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered. For a moment, I thought my voice would break. But when I said, "I grew up in a garage thinking love was something you had to earn," the room went still. Not from pity, but from recognition. That's when I realized the truth of survival. It's not about erasing pain, it's about transforming it into something that can't be used against you anymore. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, I stopped by the sea again. The sky looked the same as the day I'd met my mother, painted with streaks of gold and gray. She walked up beside me, the wind tugging at her hair. "You've changed, Alex," she said softly. "Maybe I just finally became who I was supposed to be," I replied. She smiled, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The waves crashed below, steady and endless. Somewhere behind us, the house lights began to glow, warm against the dusk. Later that evening, I sat in my study and opened a box Harold had found among the old Grayson archives. Inside were photos from before the kidnapping, my father holding me near a boat, my mother laughing beneath the Florida sun. At the bottom of the box was a letter written in my father's handwriting but never sent. The envelope was marked with my name, "For Alex, when he's found." I unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of salt and age. The message was simple. "If you ever see this, son, know that you were always loved. Whoever hurt you can't change that. The world may take things from you, but it can never take who you are." I read it twice, then closed the letter, pressing it to my chest. That night, as I walked to the porch, I saw the stars rising over the water. The same sky that had watched me in the garage, now looking down at the man I had become. I thought about all the hours I'd spent believing I was unwanted, and how those lies had finally burnt out like a dying engine. I didn't feel anger or pity, only peace. For the first time, I wasn't defined by what they had taken, but by what I had reclaimed. And standing there, under the night that had once felt so cold, I whispered to the wind, "You were right, Dad. They couldn't change who I am." A year passed before I realized I'd stopped counting the days since everything changed. Life had settled into something steady, not normal, because normal had never existed for me, but peaceful. The Grayson Foundation had grown faster than I imagined. Every month, new programs launched, new kids found stability, and every story reminded me why the past, however broken, still mattered. It gave me the purpose I now lived for. My mornings always began the same way: a cup of black coffee, the sound of the ocean outside my window, and a few quiet minutes before the world began asking for things. I still lived by rhythm more than luxury, unable to forget the years when structure was survival. Yet now, that structure was self-made. Chosen. The headlines had long since faded. The reporters moved on, the tabloids buried my story under fresher scandals. Only sometimes someone would recognize me. "Aren't you the Grayson heir? The boy who was kidnapped?" I'd answer politely, but never linger. I wasn't anyone's headline anymore. One afternoon, while sorting through Foundation reports, Harold stopped by. His hair had grayed slightly over the year, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "I have news," he said. "Karen Miller's sentencing was finalized today." For a moment, I just listened to the ocean through the window behind us. "How long?" I asked. 28 years. No parole for the first 15. I nodded. No satisfaction came, no applause inside my mind, just a calm recognition that justice had concluded its course. "It's over, then," I said quietly. Harold smiled faintly. "In a legal sense, yes. But you've already finished it, Alex. You finished it the moment you built something instead of breaking something." After he left, I went down to the shore. The sand was cool underfoot, the air full of salt and memory. Sometimes, when the waves rose high, I could almost hear echoes, the hum of the old generator, the creak of the garage door, Leon's voice in the distance. But those sounds belonged to another world, one that no longer had claim over me. I stood there until the tide erased my footprints, and it hit me how beautiful erasure could be when it meant freedom. A few days later, I received a letter from Todd. The envelope arrived without return address, postmarked from some small town in Nevada. Inside, his handwriting was rough, uneven. "Alex," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I didn't know the truth until the end. They never told me you were taken, just that you were some kid we took in. Mom said it was charity. When the FBI came, I realized what she really was. I've lost everything, but that's fair. I hope you build something better than what we ever had." I read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer. Todd wasn't wrong. They had built a house out of lies, and I'd built one out of truth. That was difference enough. Later that week, my mother convinced me to attend the annual Grayson Marine Gala, the first one I'd ever been to. The ballroom filled with people I didn't know, shaking my hand, calling me Mr. Grayson, like the name had always been mine. It didn't feel strange this time. It felt earned. Midway through the evening, as the room buzzed with music and conversation, my mother leaned close and whispered, "Your father would have been proud of you." Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I didn't look away from her emotion. I met her eyes and said, "You brought me home, Mom." That's what he would have wanted. Later, standing outside under the lights, I thought about home, how for so long it had meant walls and rules and cold nights among tools. But now, home felt like warmth shared, truth kept alive, kindness returned. No furniture, no architecture, just belonging. As the evening ended, I slipped away to the docks behind the building, where Grayson Marine's ships waited quietly in the dark. One of them bore my father's name on the side. I walked the length of it, tracing the letters with my fingers. That's when I realized how strange full circles can feel, not like explosions of revelation, but simple, still moments where everything finally fits. The next morning, I visited one of our foundation centers, a newly finished home for displaced teens. The manager led me to a small workshop behind the building, where kids were repairing bicycles. The smell of oil and metal took me back instantly, but this time it didn't hurt. Here, it meant work with dignity, not survival. A boy with freckles looked up from a tire and said, "Mr. Grayson, can you show me how to tighten the chain?" I smiled and crouched beside him. "Sure," I said. "But you'll have to do it yourself. That's how you learn." He grinned, and together we fixed the bike. When it finally rolled smoothly across the lot, he laughed out loud, bright, free, untouched by fear. I stood back, letting that sound fill the space where silence used to live inside me. Later, walking back to my car, I thought about what that moment meant. That somewhere, somehow, the garage that once held a prisoner of circumstance had become a path toward something decent. It hadn't all been wasted. Nothing ever truly is. That evening, I sat by the window with the red sneakers still on the shelf, the first and last thread between who I was and who I had become. My reflection in the glass looked older, calmer. Not haunted, just human. And as the sea whispered beyond the cliffs, I said softly, "Jake Miller is gone. But he walked me here." For the first time in my life, both names, the one I was given and the one I was born with, felt at peace within me. 5 years later, the ocean still sounded the same, calm, endless, forgiving. I'd built a life that finally felt like mine. The Grayson Foundation now spanned 3 states, helping hundreds of kids rebuild from the kind of pain I once thought no one could understand. Every time I walked through one of our centers and saw laughter instead of fear, I knew the past had finally served its purpose. Karen Miller passed away quietly in prison 2 years after her sentencing. The report said heart failure, but I suspected guilt had done most of the work long before then. Todd found steady work repairing cars somewhere in Nevada. Stephanie married, started over under a different name. I never reached out, and they never tried to. Some distances don't need crossing. My mother and I grew close in ways that words couldn't capture. We spent weekends cooking together, sometimes just watching the sun fall over the water. She no longer looked for the boy she'd lost, she looked at the man who came home. And I finally saw her not as a myth or a mirror of grief, but as the person who held a space for me even when the world had erased my name. The red sneakers still sit on the shelf above my desk, scuffed, small, eternal. They remind me that survival isn't about escape, it's about arrival. Every scar, every night in that garage, every truth uncovered led me here. When people ask who I am, I smile now. I'm Alex Grayson, I tell them. And once, long ago, I slept beside a generator. That's how I learned how light feels when it finally finds you.